why? Okay, right. Okay. It helps if we
Sorry.
get this up. No problem. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Should I speak for it kicks off?
Okay, brilliant. Okay, right. Okay. One of the things actually I did think about was that there's always inbuilt in assumptions, and one of the sort of the big issues that I advise any student at the outset is to get the definitions sorted out. And quite often what they're attempting to do is a definitional one insofar as pinning down what they think they want to do, and then what flows from that is what they once they've decided what they think they're going to do. And of course I use the word think in a very deliberate sense, because of course unless you're on a funded program where you're instructed what to do, which does happen in this country, so you enroll on a PhD in a university and effectively you become part of a research team, so the decisions are taken for you. But anyway, I'm assuming most people are more in control. So what you think you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and of course if I emphasize that word also, and just to say, I've not actually defined the word strategy, which that I kind of took that as a given. And indeed, for anybody that's interested, I wrote a book about 10 years or so ago on strategy. So I know a bit about it, dare I say it, or it was about corporate strategy. But strategy, which of course you can define it whichever way you wish, a plan of action designed to achieve a long-term overall aim. And when we talk about organizations and businesses having strategies, that's it. So if you're, I don't know, an Apple of this world, which we all know, or an Amazon, that these are sort of true global brands, they will have particular strategies about sort of working in the markets that they work in. Of course, obviously, that can alter over a period of time, depending upon the sort of the circumstances, the environment, and so on and so forth. So, but of course, what we're talking about here is our research strategies. But of course, the reason that you're here in the first place is because, of course, you are actually embarked upon or contemplating embarking upon a PhD, which by virtue is a pretty long-term aspiration. PhDs normally take 3 years full-time, 5, 6, 7 years part-time. So it's a fair old chunk of time. And I do actually use the words later on the slide presentation. It's about thinking about sort of the plan of action. In fact, I used the word project management, which is what's the sort of what's the landing point, as is often sort of used, and then working backwards. What do you need to be doing today or tomorrow that will give you the sort of the ability to do whatever you need to be doing in the case of a PhD, 3 years full-time or 5, 6, 7 years part-time. So that's essentially just to sort of to lay down the sort of the objective of this. And I'll go through the sort of the next slide. So what we're thinking about is the sort of the it's the sort of what you think about doing, because of course it is a bit like the puzzle. Indeed, the sort of the graphic down the right hand corner, you'll sort of say it can feel a bit like that. There's a vast array of strategies, and many of which will have relevance. But and again, the difficulty is because you don't really know, or maybe not clear about what it is that you want to achieve. And again, I say that very deliberately, because of course quite often the nature of sort of PhDs is trying to sort of pin the problem down. And of course that's the other sort of skill that you may have and will serve you really well. If you can think about what you're trying to do really early on and be absolutely clear about it, it does make the sort of the path a lot clearer. And indeed, strategies are often a bit like journeys. And if you're going to take a journey, then you work out the best routes, whether you sort of want to drive there or whether you want to take public transport, the trains or the buses or taxi, whether if it's a short enough distance, you want to cycle there or even to walk. So which is the sort of the most effective way of getting through the sort of the path through to sort of the final destination, as it were. So what we're going to also consider is the sort of the strategies that you might wish to sort of to achieve to ensure the most effective progress. And then third of these points, what key questions must be addressed at the outset, as much as possible to use the word expedite your journey, to make it as quick as possible, because I do appreciate that when we're talking about sort of years, it seems like an incredibly long time. Take it from me, 3 years full time it may seem a long time, but it certainly flies by. As I get older, time seems to sort of go so much quicker than it did when I was a youth. But there you go. So of course you want to try and make this this journey as effective, as efficient, as rapid, and dare I say, as enjoyable as possible. Okay, key takeaways. Again, competence comes with confidence. And indeed, I sort of used the word confidence later on, but of course, competence is doing things and knowing what works. But of course, the trouble is at the outset, quite often you're attempting things, trying it, sucking it to see if it works, as the expression goes, and then finding out that maybe it didn't work in the way that you anticipated. That's unfortunately a sort of inevitable consequence of research. There can be dead ends. Although, dare I say it, dead ends are often very useful because, of course, they give you an ability to learn something new. A word which I like, it comes from sort of an ancient, well, it's not that ancient, it's a couple of 100 years old, the story of the sort of the land of serendipity, where, and what serendipity means is, of course, what this is based upon, chance encounters. And quite often, the great sort of revelations and the sort of great leaps in knowledge are often as a result of unintended consequences, things that happened, and people thought, yeah, that's interesting, that's worth pursuing. I didn't think that would happen. The example that comes immediately to mind is penicillin, which was developed by accident. And research can be a bit like that. You keep yourself open to sort of the possibility of opportunities availing themselves, which may sort of allow you to sort of to take your research in a sort of slightly different direction, maybe even a very radically different direction. And again, that's for the sort of for you to choose. My view always is that sort of be guided by the data. I'll talk about literature in a couple of moments, but literature can often be this. Well, it is the starting point. That is for sure. But quite often, what you find in literature may not bear as much resemblance to sort of to empirical practice and data as you'd expect. And so what makes for a sort of good piece of doctoral work is an abundance of data, and of course the one thing that sort of will kill it is if you can't get the data for the things that you think that you're after, or you're trying to sort of to explore or examine. Okay, again, I don't need to sort of, hopefully you can also see the cursor, the ability to appreciate the range of options, because they're not necessarily limitless, but of course they'll be guided by certain things, which I'll sort of talk about in more detail in a short while. Understand the juxtaposition between theory and practice, because of course that's what research is always about, is that sort of nothing is ever sort of when a student comes and says there's nothing written about this, there's no theory, that's I always think not true, because there's always a theory of something or other, and theory is one of these wonderful words that has a sort of a particular significance, but all that theory is an explanation. And we have lots of explanations about things. We have some pretty ludicrous explanations. If you like, sort of, you can have theories about whatever you wish. Whether it's true or not is another matter. People have theories that there's life in outer space, but we have no evidence of that. But of course, who knows? Maybe in the fullness of time, that will indeed be proved. We're told that there are flying objects or unidentified flying objects in contact with alien beings, but I've not seen the evidence, so therefore I'm not sure. So of course the point about sort of theory is that it's where you normally start from, and then what I'm always really interested in is the sort of the practice, what actually goes on. And given that I sort of work in a way which looks at sort of organizations, or as I also call them, social settings, where people are doing whatever they do, whether it be for business or for sort of in a hospital, which of course can be about sort of profit making, but it's about making people better, or any sort of social setting where people get together, they have a common purpose. Quite often they may indeed have a strategy, which is very formal. Quite often what you'll find is that people are operating in a way which has a sort of a formalistic aspect, but at the same time there's an informal nature to what they do and how they do it. And of course this is the sort of the difference between the theory of what goes on, espoused theory, and theory and practice as it's also described. I used this word a couple of moments ago, confidence in challenging existing theory. That's part of what the skill of being a sort of researcher is understanding how you can actually sort of use what you've discovered And yeah, again, if the sort of the existing or extent theory is lacking, or dare I say it, plain wrong, or certainly suspect, then what you're able to do, and this is a very valuable thing to be able to achieve, and indeed is the sort of probably one of the big benchmarks and ticks that you'll get if you get to your Viva, is contribution to theory. What have you done that helps us to better understand, to better be able to cope in the future? Okay, takeaway 5, enhance capability in articulating your research plan. Because of course, again, I add the sort of the caveat to that. Plans are only good. I mean, there's a sort of an expression that any plan is only as good as its sort of its ability to sort of to stand up in the sort of heat of battle, or words to that effect. And of course, what you also have are contingencies. If it doesn't work, adapt it. Don't sort of go on. It's a bit like my journey. If you find that sort of the road that you're going to use is blocked because there's been a crash or roadworks, then find a different route. And I think research strategies are like that. If what you're going to do is not going to work in the way that you thought, try something different. Okay, which I think pretty much takes us through to key takeaway number 6. So I'll get into the sort of slide presentation. Why do you need a strategy? Well, again, this builds upon everything I've just been saying. It's what research is intended to do is discover answers to intellectual and practical problems through the application of methods. And these are keywords appropriate to the phenomena, and phenomena is just the plural of phenomenon. The phenomenon of aliens. Well, how are you going to sort of research whether or not they're aliens? This is, as they call it, the hunt for the black swan, as it were. Somebody thinks it exists, but they've got to try and prove it. The point being that, and again, I'll talk about this in more detail in a while, it's the sort of the nature of what you're doing will provide a certain, and this is the sort of at the heart of philosophy, this will give you the sort of the direction as to how the research needs to be carried out. And this is also particularly important because, of course, when you get to Viva, certainly if examiners are anything like me, I'm very interested to know that the philosophical aspect, a doctorate, and certainly a sort of doctorate of philosophy, most particularly, is to sort of understand, well, what is the sort of nature of what you're doing, and how do we better understand? So there's a whole philosophical sort of history and tradition that underpins sort of the carrying out of research, and the student, in my opinion, is expected to at least be able to articulate what they did and how they did it, and to be able to sort of clarify, and again, coming back to that word, to define the sort of the nature of the sort of the of what they've done. Research is a systematic process. I've missed that one. I'm not, it maybe considered a systemized effort to gain new knowledge, which builds upon what I've just been saying a couple of moments ago, because of course that's the whole point of research. If all you're doing is okay, maybe there's a sort of view that you're demonstrating that what people think is true, but if all you're doing is repeating what others have done and coming up with the same results, yeah, well, okay, that's fine, but it's not really contributing. So the acid test of sort of doctoral work is that how can you demonstrate what you've done is, and again, don't get too carried away by this or too worried about it, new knowledge, but is contributing to the sort of the sum of knowledge in a different way, or giving us new perspectives is often sort of a good way to do this, as opposed to sort of simply just replicating. And that is indeed important. And indeed, because is it worthy of being published? That's another sort of very good test of research work. Research is the systematic process of collecting and analysing information, data in inverted commas, in order to increase understanding of the phenomena about which we're concerned or interested. And indeed, in the sort of the last of these bullet points, the great Albert Einstein, you'll have all heard of him, I would believe. I'd be amazed if you hadn't. Again, the great physicist of Brand lived about 100 years ago. Well, certainly it was around sort of during the Second World War. If we knew what we're doing, it wouldn't be called research, would it? And that's also sort of true, because of course people often say we sort of we do research every day of the week because when we go out the door, well, yeah, that's called common sense. But again, common sense is that sort of you look out the window and see if it's raining, and bring an umbrella or a coat. You know, but dare I say it, that research, which is the nature of the thing that we're talking about at this moment, is something which is a lot more systemized, which is the word you see above, and disciplined in a way which, of course, would allow you to sort of write up a thesis, which of course is the thing that will be examined. That's the sort of the key objective in all of this. Okay, key questions that sort of are prerequisites to developing the research strategy. What is it you believe you want to achieve, and how may the knowledge be used? So this is really sort of important at the outset to try and sort of clarify where you think you're going. I talked about this a couple of moments ago. There's always a sort of the role of background literature. Dare I say it, one of the things that sort of students often sort of become a bit obsessed by, and in a very understandable way, because I did it myself when I was doing my PhD about 30 years ago, was that you try and read everything, and the trouble is that what does everything mean? Because as I always acknowledge, every good publication often has a sort of series of references at the end, and then you think, well, I need to read all those, and then all of those have got sort of a series of references, a bit like the sort of the Russian doll. But this is a kind of it's working in the other way. You start with the small doll and getting bigger and bigger. It's a quest to infinity. It's an impossible sort of quest. The other thing which I would sort of say is that sort of if you don't really define it well at the outset, and it's dare I say, a bit muddled, and you're crossing boundaries and disciplines, then you're going to try and read far too many things, and that is just a route to well, I call it failure, but it'll cause you to sort of be severely sort of curtailed in ability to make progress. So the quicker you can define what it is that you're doing and get your definitions sorted out, the better. Okay, what's the sort of nature of the data that you're going to collect, and indeed how accessible will it be? Because of course sometimes there are issues, and this is what sort of makes doing laboratory research so enticing, dare I say it, because of course you control the conditions. It is what also makes going out into the sort of the social world much more difficult, because of course you then have to get access to people, you have to get them to provide answers if it's in the organizational setting, or also if you're going to sort of get them to complete a questionnaire, then of course you've got to be able to sort of hope that sort of they will complete it, and well, that they'll agree to complete it, but more particularly they'll understand the questions that you're asking. But we'll come back to that in a bit, and there's a whole sort of course on questionnaire design. I'm not the biggest fan of them, because I think that they're sort of they only work well when you're using closed questions, very simple questions to which there are sort of binary responses perhaps, or limited responses. Whereas of course I think that the organizations are much more fascinating and intriguing, and often much more irrational than the sort of the literature would suggest it is. A big thing that you will have to consider is the ethical dimensions of what you're doing. Is what you're doing legal, honorable, decent? Does it comply with the sort of the standards that will be expected? Are there potential risks to the individual or to the organization involved? But yeah, and this is a very good way, if you like, at the outset, of working out all the sort of the aspects of the ethics. And if you do that, then the chances are that you'll probably sort of you will avoid the sort of the big problems that may occur later, because no researcher, no person involved in research wants research to sort of end up in a situation where that there are serious questions being asked, because of course quite often at that point everything stops, and indeed it can be and if research stops, it's often very difficult to get started back again. So thinking about these issues is a good thing to do, and indeed it's absolutely essential in many universities, and if not all, in fact. And the final one, what's the timetable? And again, I sort of outlined the sort of the timetable you may have in mind, but you have some degree of control on this. I mean, can PhDs be done quicker than 3 years full-time, 6 years part-time? Yes, but of course only by sort of making very rapid progress. It's a bit like everything. The more you sort of pre-plan before you start your journey, the better. The last thing you want to do is to sort of have to keep stopping to I don't know, fix the car, or I don't know, toilet breaks, and or maybe you sort of get halfway to your destination and find you've forgotten something, or that you didn't sort of consult the sort of the one of the sort of the route guides that I'm trying to think of an alternative, but I'll use it. Google Maps, which is brilliant because it will tell you what's happening on the roads that you intend to use and give you various options. But again, those things don't necessarily exist for research. But having said that, pre-planning and pre-thought will serve you well. Okay, I'm just going to sort of grab a mouthful of a drink because I'm okay. So think about the overall process of research. What should the end product consist of? Well, you're probably well aware of this, but it's always worth keeping in mind. Identification of the general problem or question, or indeed, in some cases, the hypothesis that you're using. A literature review, which is standard, because of course you have to be able to demonstrate that you've come from somewhere, because of course, how can you contribute to knowledge if you don't sort of provide a demonstration of what existed before? Specifying the sort of questions and hypotheses. So again, this is sort of, an advancement on sort of bullet point number 1. Determination of the design and the methods that are sort of used to collect the data, the way the data, well, the sort of the data that was actually collected, the data analysis, and what sense you make of it, the interpretation. Actually, you know, I probably should put on the conclusions, but the conclusions that should come out of it. And sometimes the sort of the recommendations to, if that's the nature. I'm not a big fan, I'll be honest, of the recommendations in doctoral work. But then, having said that, because of course it depends on the nature of the work. And excuse me, dare I say, if you're recommending, if it's a piece of work carried out in an organisation, this is by professional doctorates. It lends itself in that domain, that you actually sort of make recommendations to the organisations about what you've researched by whatever means you've carried out or applied or utilised. Then you recommend the organisation should do certain things. And the thing about doctoral pieces of work is that often done by the person who works in the organisations. So just to clarify why I'm not a big fan, is that the recommendations about the future. And again, you know, this is why you can't really research. Well, if your research consists of things that you think may happen in the future, that's not research, that's speculation. And research should be carried about things that have actually occurred. What's the data tell us now, which will help us to inform what may occur in the future. And as I say, so if your research is always about the future, then it becomes perpetual speculation, which is a different endeavor altogether. Okay, how will a research, well, it should have been strategy, help me to make effective progress? Determine the process of considering solutions, again, because of course it should be based upon rigorous analysis of the empirical factors, and that's the important thing. What is it you're going to do that's going to sort of to allow you to sort of to understand the data much better? Provide clarity as to the essential information needed and make informed decisions as to how to successfully deal with any problems. Again, you know, this comes back to this preparedness. The more you prepare, the better you are able to deal with any sort of deviation from the sort of the journey that you're embarked upon. Always have a sort of a plan B, as it were. You know, again, as I said, if the sort of the if you're walking somewhere and it starts to rain, then have an umbrella, perhaps, if you think that may happen, or alternatively, have the ability to sort of ring up a taxi and get into that. Again, the more options you give yourself at the outset, the better. But of course, the thing to do is not to sort of to have so many options you're not sure which one to use. So also, the one to use is the one that you think is going to be most effective. Okay, it'll assist in gleaning the appropriate information, so or eliciting, if you prefer that word, or just getting hold of, because of course, in order to analyze data, you've got to get it in the first place. And if you're not able to get it for whatever reasons, there could be a multitude of sort of concerns. What the most interesting research, dare I say, is that which is kind of a little bit controversial or edgy. But of course, the thing, a bit like, I don't know, criminality perhaps. But of course, the thing about criminality is that sort of, in order to understand it better, you've got to really sort of talk to the people engaged in criminality, and for reasons which I don't need to tell you, They often, they don't make themselves freely available. So if you're going to understand the sort of the minds of people, again, one which I've been interested is corruption in organisations. That goes on, we know, but again, the difficulty is that don't be surprised to sort of when people don't want to admit to it, or or at least they don't want to sort of to admit it goes on when everyone full well knows it does. It makes it difficult, and of course there's the ethical dimensions which I talked about a while ago. So what you've got to then do is to sort of find other methods of getting hold of that data, and sometimes it requires you to sort of to do it covertly, and covert research is great in one sense. And I've sort of remember reading a great book, the title of which escapes me at this moment. I remember it was by Schaefer and Stebbins, but it was about insider research, and effectively it was talking about the sort of the methods you do this. And there was a couple of really great accounts of people who went undercover to carry out their research. But boy, oh boy, that sets off lots of sort of ethical sort of alarm bells. And it makes it very difficult to sort of to publish it, because of course you've effectively, I'm using this word as carefully as I can, you've deceived the sort of the people that you're involved in your purposes. So if you've applied on the basis that you're going to work in this organization and then use this as an opportunity to effectively spy, again, that's not sort of something that is welcomed by lots of people for a reason which I don't probably need to elaborate at this moment. Again, let's stick to sort of to what we're trying to do, which is to better understand. What you're trying to have is a range of approaches in terms of the methods. Okay, literature, I've talked about this. It is the starting point. What exists and what sense do you make of it? And I guess the real difficulty is, what you'll find is that there's if you're not careful about this and you don't put sort of boundaries around what it is that you're going to do, and you're trying to do too many complex things, it becomes an impossible sort of task to try and assimilate and to sort of to bring it down to something which is manageable. Just as a sort of a broad guide in any sort of piece of work that I've ever looked at, whether it be a sort of research paper, or a sort of, let's face it, what we're talking about here is a research thesis. The literature and the background theory, if you will, the background literature should contribute no more than a third, and between a quarter and a third, but a third is probably good. So what I'm saying is that in a sort of an 80,000 word thesis, which tends to be about the standard, then what you're looking at is 25,000 plus words. But if you go to 30,000, well, of course, you've gone beyond a third, because quite clearly 30,000 is a third of 90,000. So you get some sort of sense that it's a significant chunk of the piece of work. But and again, when people are starting out, they think, oh, that sounds incredible, and it is. It's a lot of work. Of course, if you're going to do a really thorough job on this piece of work, you've got to be able to make sure that you've covered what are sort of seen to be all of the sort of the critical and key and seminal explanations that are offered by the sort of those who sort of worked in this area. And I say that and offer this advice, the more limited or the more bounded you can make your sort of research area, the better, because of course allowing it to sort of to be wide in scope means that you're trying to cover too much, and trying to read too much is what normally causes a sense of difficulty and frustration at the outset. Okay. Actually, this is a typo. I should check this. That should actually read established truth, not trust. So truths, wisdom or theory. So what you're looking for, and again, what is truth? Well, of course, that's it's a loaded word, but quite clearly, if theories are offered, then it must be true. Quite clearly that the sun will come up tomorrow. That's a truth, but whether you see it or not depends on another matter. But it's been happening for billions of years. But hey, it may not happen, but yeah, the point I'm trying to make here is that sort of we have lots of useful and valid theories, which, yeah, they're replicable. We know that we can produce electricity by burning fuel and generating electricity, which allows us to sort of live in the sort of the modern world. Yeah, that's also very true. What's also interesting is I see lots of theories about the sort of the way that organizations operate and people interact, and quite often they do not always do it in with the same levels of consistency as you'd expect non-social phenomena to operate. And again, I'll come back to this. So that's an important aspect here. So thinking about sort of what exists in terms of truth and how you can sort of pick it apart or sort of think about it differently will be really useful. What's the purpose of the particular literature? There's always an audience to this thing. Again, even if in your PhD, it'll be read by at least, I don't know, your supervisor will read it, and maybe a few others, but it will sort of be guaranteed to be read by the sort of the examiners. Beyond that, who knows? It may never be read again. That's if it's good enough, then hopefully other people will pick it up. And indeed, that's what you would hope, is that you sort of turn it into something which is has the ability to sort of a wider audience. That's when it goes into research papers or texts or whatever it might be. Can it be summarized into the key concepts? I'm a great believer in sort of trying to get down to boil things down. What is the sort of, what does it come down to when you summarize it? Because of course that helps you to sort of to break it down into bits. And I'm talking about grand theory, which is made up of other things. What's going through my mind at the moment is, in management, which I've taught in the past, we talk about motivation, but what is motivation? Well, I'll leave you to sort of work out your own definition for that. But motivation can consist of lots of things: the situation, the person, their own personality, and what drives them to want to be motivated. It's highly complex and sometimes variable. Not all people are consistent. Because that's the nature of sort of beings. But again, thinking about breaking it down into sort of useful methods, if you like, of trying to better understand the sort of the nature of what it is that you're involved in. And the final bullet point: what will you be able to contribute to the corpus, which is a sort of Latin word, the body of knowledge, which is always important, because of course that, as I say, or I've said on a couple of occasions already, is the sort of the key test that will be applied by the examiners of any doctoral piece of work. So what are the characteristics that are regarded as a persuasive research? Should be systematic, carried out in a way which has got some sort of method which can be fully understood, logical, and again, that's why you start at the sort of theory, work out what it is that you think you want to do, collect the data, then compare it back to sort of the existing sort of theory, and then contribute. There should be an empirical element, which basically means that the sort of that there is a sort of a data element. Although, dare I say, and of course, as soon as I say it, that there are exceptions, you can get piece of research which are they're essentially sort of they're a treatise, if you like, or sort of it's a discourse analysis. By that I mean it's an analysis of what exists, and trying to sort of draw that together, and that can be really helpful. And indeed, if you find that as part of your own piece of work, it can be really helpful in clarifying what the sort of the terrain is. And it's a bit like the sort of the word here, replicable. In fact, perhaps I should have put a question mark there. Does it have to be replicable? Well, yes. If you're working in the scientific domain, then you want it to be, and for developing a new drug, for instance, you want it to sort of to work for in all situations. But the reason I sort of even challenge myself on this one is that in organizations, and I talked about motivation a couple of minutes ago, motivation, it's always about money, isn't it? But of course the reality is that when you do research into this, it's not always about money. Money is a sort of a useful tool to try and sort of get better understanding of what drives people. But actually money, when you sort of actually do well, start to talk to people, you find it's undoubtedly important. I accept all of that, but it's only one of the sort of the many factors, and quite often it's about lots of other things that are at work, and that's what really drives people. So again, be careful about the sort of the replicable aspect. What you're doing should be creative and using methods that are appropriate. And again, we're going to come back to that in a couple of minutes, because of course appropriateness of methods is something which I'm always very interested in terms of what the student has done and how they've done it. And indeed, lo and behold, we get to methods. Right, okay. There's a couple of words which, yeah, they're important. Well, I mean, in fact, that they're used very regularly in the research community, and the first of which is ontology, and it refers to what sort of things exist in the social world, or indeed the social world, and the assumptions about the form and nature of that social reality. It's concerned with whether or not social reality exists independently of human understanding, interpretation. For instance, is there a shared social reality or multiple context-specific realities? Now, of course, I've taken this definition from sort of a social researcher, but again, the thing that we have is, and ontology, it doesn't tend to be sort of, well, at least the scientists don't tend to concern themselves with ontology, because of course the nature of what it is that they're looking at or examining and researching, it's a given. So if you've got particles or cells or sort of physical material, if you like, such as timber or steel, yeah, it is whatever it is. It's and of course it can vary in terms of its composition, strength, and so on and so forth. But again, you can define it very accurately, or you can, and its characteristics. Whereas in the sort of the world of those carrying out sort of research in organisations, that there is this issue of sort of, well, and it comes back to this thing about sort of truth. Is because somebody believes something, is that necessarily true? Well, yeah, they may believe it, and others will have a different opinion, and of course that's what makes sort of the world go round, as it were. So we've got to be careful about what ontology is, but or at least understanding the nature of what it is that you're trying to sort of research. And and perhaps just to summarise, get this absolutely clear, if you're going to sort of study a piece of steel and its characteristics in holding a building up, or resisting fire, or, or a piece of material that's going to be used in a car, carbon fiber, for instance, which of course is very effective, very lightweight but very strong. Yeah, that its ontology is the nature of the material. It's been created in whatever it has. If we're talking about people in social situations, that's very different. It's okay. Just following on from sort of the understanding of ontology. So 3 positions: realism. Again, this is the sort of the spectrum, that there is an external reality independent of what people may think or understand to be. And again, so what I've just sort of talked about sort of being carbon fiber, that it is whatever it is. It's we know it's a strong material because of the sort of the nature of the cellular structure and the way it's created. Secondly, idealism maintains that reality can only be understood by the human mind and is socially constructed. And again, we all have different sort of views and interpretations, and that's also a very useful way to understand when we're carrying out research. When I use the sort of the word highly motivated people, what does that mean to people? Or if you go into an organization and talk about strategies, for instance, what does that mean to people? And other such words. It depends. People have their own view about what they think it consists of and how they think it should be sort of played out. And of course, the real skill and art in an organization is to have everyone doing the same thing at the same time, or doing it in a consistent way. The reality often is that people do similar things in different ways, and they do different things in the same way, and it can often look a bit confusing, and this is why we get the inconsistencies. I've just somebody just.
Yes, I was going to ask a question. We've had Professor, systematic reviews.
I've just seen that question.
Yes, replicable or repeatable. What is, I'm assuming it's wording, what is different when it comes to replicable?
Well, again, replicable. Again, perhaps I'm regretting putting that sort of word in, because if you're carrying out scientific research and you want this thing to sort of if you have a theory that A plus B equals C, and I don't know, you put two chemicals together and it creates a sort of a different chemical composition, then you want that to be precise. And I'm trying to think, when we sort of turn on our switches, we just assume electricity will be there, but there's a whole set of theories that sort of underpin all of that. But we know that sort of electricity is generated because, of course, of the sort of the use of fuel to create the sort of electricity in the first place. That's replicable. That was an invention. It was the originally, but it is still often steam, isn't it? But it depends that you create the sort of the ability to turn the sort of the turbines around, which generates electricity. It's replicable. But in social situations, it may not be replicable. And again, I come back to sort of my own situation where I was doing my PhD, where I was looking at the use of quality assurance systems or quality management in the use of ISO 9000, and the view that was being propagated in the sort of the early 1990s when I was engaged in this research was that they would make organizations more effective and efficient, and lots of other sort of virtues. And sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. It was not, it was not the same as the sort of the light switch where you could turn it on and it would have the same effect for everyone. So what it did do, it created lots of disturbance, and some of which was good for organizations because it allowed people to ask questions, and some of which was not so good, and it caused levels of confusion. So that's why it really depends upon what you're engaged in. But hey, look, I mean, I'm giving a sort of one particular position, that there are many in the sort of the world of business and management and sociology who claim that you can predict human behavior. I don't happen to share that view, or you can't. I'll go so far as saying most behavior is pretty, what's the word? It is pretty consistent. But then there are inconsistencies, and again, but of course, in organizations or in technology, you design a system to work in the way that you want it to work, and sometimes it breaks down, but often that's just because the component breaks down, or there's a glitch or sort of a software issue, and you fix it, and of course it goes back to normal. And the human body's a bit like that. The human body operates in particular ways, but it has inconsistency. This is at the heart of sort of our understanding of sort of the world around us. And what are we? We're not machines. That's what I would like to stress, is that, and we don't operate like robots. And any manager who thinks that you can program people to do things in this way is probably going to fail. You just hope that most of the people do most of what you want most of the time. I know that sounds a real fudge, but that's the nature of how organizations operate. But again, forgive me, I'm always dropping back into the world which I know, although I did train as an engineer, so I understand that world also. But you don't have these concerns about sort of the things that have or physical phenomena such as carbon fiber or drugs, because of course they operate in the way that you want them to operate. Although, again, as we know with the sort of the pandemic, not everyone gets the same benefit, because of course it depends upon the physiology. So you get into lots of sort of difficult questions. Okay, and I'll just come back to this now because I'm conscious of time also. Similar to realism, materialism also claims there's a real world, but it's only the material or physical world that can be considered a real. Again, this is just what I've been saying. Other phenomena, for instance, beliefs, values, experiences, rise in the material world, but not shape it. So again, how would I sort of summarize that? If everyone in the world had a Ferrari, we'd all be happier. Yeah, maybe. But as anyone sort of know, and I teach economics, the diminishing marginal utility. The first sports car you get is great. When you've got 10, you don't get as much joy, I would have thought, at the 10th sports car. I don't have one, so I can't speak from experience. And we hear billionaires who, where do they get their joy? Well, I don't know, flying to space these days, because it's the sort of thing that most of us cannot do. The point is, though, different people have different perspectives, and again, understanding those perspectives can be really useful in understanding the way in which the world operates. Okay, right. Well, this brings us to sort of the bit which I'm always most interested in, because of course I tend to take ontology as being pretty straightforward. If you know what it is that you're doing, and you know what it consists of, then that will determine the sort of the nature of the methods, or the sort of the applicable, let me think about this word more carefully, the appropriateness of the sort of the method that you're going to use to know and learn about, well, in this case, social reality, or whatever that you want to do. And again, the two main perspectives for knowing are positivism and interpretism. And in the sense then, the sort of that the positivism is what I've just been sort of saying, that if I have an experiment, you have an independent variable, a dependent variable, and what you're trying to do is to sort of establish a causal relationship. So again, carbon fiber, it will take certain loads, as it were. It's how we design planes. We know that if you put attached jet engines, they will sort of take off, because of course you're able to fly through the air. Indeed, Formula One cars are sort of a bit like planes, but upside down, that they're glued to the surface of the sort of road. If you could run a Formula One car on a ceiling, it would sort of stick to the ceiling, because of course that's downforce. So these are the sort of things which allow us to use the sort of the laws of physics in the known world. What's interesting for physicists, and that those who are sort of particularly engaged in astrophysics, is that when you go into outer space, all the same laws of physics apply. And it may be different, but of course we don't know, because we haven't gotten far enough. So far, it's allowed us to go to the moon, and put human beings on the moon, although that was a long time ago. And we've sent rockets to Mars and beyond. Using the sort of the known laws of physics on Earth. Interpretivism is the sort of the other end of the spectrum, which is the idea that if you're working in social situations, you want to be able to adapt what you're able to do in order to better understand, and to sort of to interrogate, and I use that word in sort of the widest possible way, the sort of the way in which people's opinions and views are shaped by their own lived experiences. And in fact, the second of these bullet points, constructivism and naturalistic are terms associated with literature. I return to the literature, and a consistent sort of way of interpretism. And this is the idea that you sort of, in order to better understand, you've got to go out there and construct the views empirically from the sort of the opinions that people sort of have, and the views that they hold, and the sort of the observations that you are able to sort of to glean from sort of looking at people and what they do, and as I say, coupled with the explanations they offer for what they do. And the third bullet point, the term construction is helpful because it identifies the basic principle that reality is socially constructed, a relative position that holds the view that there is no external reality independent of human consciousness. And indeed, that's perhaps what makes us different to every other species on this planet. We can rationalize what we do. I know that there's a view that some aspects of the animal kingdom are highly intelligent, but of course, no matter how intelligent they are and how they respond to us, they cannot speak, they cannot articulate. They are not dialogical creatures like we are, and can offer our own explanations, and indeed allow researchers such as myself and others to make sense. Whoops, sorry, and I'm going to just go through these now. Forgive me, the chances are that you'll probably have seen a lot of these already, but I think it's quite useful to sort of to think about if you look at the graphics down below, if anybody's ever seen a human brain, which it's a peculiar thing. I think it's about £5 on average, or thereabouts, of this kind of grey amorphous, like a sort of a thick blancmange, if you will, or it's sort of it's like a thick jelly, although it's more than jelly, because and that's we understand the brain and we understand bits that operate within it, but but it's not like a computer. It's analog. The analogy is made to sort of a really clever computer, but hey, computers, okay, I know that they're advancing, they don't have the sort of same range of emotions. So again, what we've got to think about is the sort of the way in which we sort of use our brains to sort of to better understand the world around us. And that's, dare I say it, we're able to do things now. Okay, this session being a case in point. When I first started in academia, okay, I could have done my sort of presentation and it would be recorded, and it could have been shown live to other people. or recorded and sort of sent by videotape and watched subsequently. The fact that we're able to talk to literally anybody on the planet who's got access to the internet, that's a massive advancement in terms of the use of technology, which allows us to do what we're doing now. But anyway, coming back to sort of the traditions, quantitative research, which of course comes back to sort of if I just go back to the previous slide, positivism. So, and it's the sort of the deductive approach, which you'll see that sort of word appearing shortly, based upon the idea of logical positive, that is, there is a single reality with stable social facts that are separate from the feelings and beliefs of individuals. And again, you know, the slant on this is about sort of studying organization, but of course, you know, this will sort of apply in any sort of scientific endeavor. You know, it's about sort of being able to accurately measure, co-defining what it is that you're doing, measuring the sort of the outputs, and then sort of seeing whether it sort of proves or disproves the sort of the theory or the hypothesis, if you will, as opposed to sort of to quantitative research, which is about the words based upon the notion of constructivism, which assumes that multiple realities are socially constructed through individuals and what their perceptions or views of what they think is going on in the situation in which they're in. And of course, as anybody who's ever done this will tell you, different people have different views, but that's, you know, we are not all made the same way. You know, we don't look the same, for goodness sake. So, you know, this is a planet of, what is it? When I last looked, you know, we're heading towards 8 billion people, and you know, very few people look the same. I mean, you get identical twins, and even identical twins have certain differences, certainly in terms of the sort of their personality. You know, it may be sort of highly sort of marginal, but nonetheless, they are different individuals. Quantitative research seeks to establish relationships and explain cause and change in measured variables. And you know, this is what brings into the sort of the goal of science, to explain and predict, which is absolutely fine, you know, in the sort of the world of the sort of the phenomena that lends itself to such, as opposed to qualitative research, which is concerned with understanding of the social phenomena and the perspectives, participants' perspectives, and of course, normally and typically will require the person, the researcher, to sort of be involved in the social situation. And that's why I'm always a bit skeptical when people say, well, I'm going to study something in an organization, but I'm only going to do it by questionnaires. So, right, okay, so you're going to send this thing out to, I don't know, as many people as you can get them to complete the questionnaire, but you don't actually want to speak to the people involved. You know, I would have said that that's suspect. Again, because of course I quite fancy having another mouthful. Any views, Jack? Feel free to jump in.
Sorry, I'm going to very much leave it with you.
For those who are not aware, who didn't, Jack is she's based. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. Yeah, in Australia. So I think it's 1 o'clock in the morning, whereas 3 o'clock and the sun is shining where I am. So sorry about this. Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, again, what we'll get into, and we'll talk about, is that sort of people sort of, because of course, let's keep in mind it's about the strategy and the journey. So which should I select, and what people then end up doing is they sort of they try the halfway house, the mixed methods. I'll try a bit of the sort of the hypothesizing, and I'll sort of use some sort of numbers, and then I'll sort of supplement it with some sort of words. And then of course the sort of the big challenge is that sort of, you know, which is telling you what you think it should be telling you, which is more persuasive. And of course that's when the sort of the requires the real skill of the researcher. I'm really conscious of time. Actually, it's taking longer than I thought to get to this, but so what I'll do is I'll get to the end, and we can come back and deal with the questions. Quantitative research goes towards logical positivism, assumes a single reality, and it's yeah, again, I think we've that's actually, it repeats the sort of previous page. Concern with context-free generalization, and of course that's the sort of the key here, and this is where we get back to replicability. Can this what you're predicting, or can your theory stand up to testing in the future? And if you sort of do that, would it allow you then to do the things that you want to do? Like, you know, the light bulb. You know, the light bulb comes on because, of course, the electricity, which has come from somewhere. You know, we don't think about this. It goes straight to the light bulb, and it sort of turns the element on. It allows this computer to operate. That these are also things which are it's the world created on the basis of the laws of physics as we understand them. Coming as opposed to sort of to the when we use qualitative research, It's these are about the context. They're contextually bound, and of course, the so-called thick descriptions. Essentially, they would avoid, or at least I would sort of say, and I've used the word there, they eschew generalization, because of course, if you do a case study, for instance, can that tell you that what's going to happen in another organization, which is a different situation involving different people? And again, the warning I would give to you is that when you do carry out research on people, don't be surprised that even the people that you research can be sometimes inconsistent. What they tell you one day may be different to what they tell you the next day. That's the nature of human beings. We are fundamentally irrational, dare I say.
Depends what mood they're in.
It depends what mood they're in. Absolutely, how tired they are, of course. Again, this sounds, again, it feels like I'm saying the same thing, but it is different, I assure you. So quantitative research seeks to establish relationships, explain cause and change in measured variables. That's the goal of science, to explain, predict, whereas qualitative research concerns of understanding of the social phenomena and the participants' perspectives, and to proffer faithful accounts. And what I mean by that is that what they tell you is what they tell you, and what they believe is going on in the situation that they're in. Indeed, perhaps well, what we're into is that and this is the big difference. Qualitative research, scientific method known as a priori. It's you decide on the question, the hypothesis, probably more likely in this situation, and the thing that you're going to test prior to going into, or prior to conduct the research. So the goal is to explain and predict. So what you're doing is using the theory as the starting point, and then enhancing what's known to push forward the boundaries of knowledge. Qualitative research is a posterior, and this is much more about an emergent approach in which what you're looking for is meaning and interpretation. And the idea then is that by going into the situation and using inductive methods, a research question or research hunch, if you like, I know there's something going on here, but I want a better understanding. You're trying to generate clues. You're trying to theory build. You're trying to offer a better explanation rather than imposing your views on the world in which you're carrying out the research. So that's an important distinction to make. And again, this reinforce it. Quantitative research uses experimental or correlation approaches to try as much as you possibly can. And if you do use this approach, then don't be surprised if people are asked, if you're expected to justify how you eliminated errors, bias, or any other influence of extraneous variables. So again, and of course, the idea then is that there's detachment of the researcher from the study, because of course you don't want to influence it. Whereas if you're engaged in qualitative research, where you're actually looking at people, and of course the whole point is that I've heard this, that a good qualitative researcher can be a fly on the wall. Well, yeah, even flies on the wall, they create disturbance, but in qualitative research, you're trying to understand what people are doing, but also recognizing the mere fact that you're asking them to explain their actions means, of course, that they are having to reflect, which is something that they might not necessarily do normally. So you've got to be careful that you don't bias it in a particular way. So as much as possible, you want to be neutral, or theory neutral, if at all possible. Although the mere fact that you're studying this suggests that, of course, that you have best interest, even if it is only about better understanding. Okay, so the key words here: multiple and conflicting perspectives, but most particularly subjectivity and interpretation. So one is objective, and I've not used that word there, but this is about objectivity. This is about subjectivity. Right, okay, we get to the tail end of this presentation. Quantitative research, deductive, what can be proved or indeed disproved, obtained through the use of measurements and statistics, use of hypotheses to test statistical probability and correlation and whatever else. And the results, when you present your theory, will be replicated by others. And indeed, again, if you don't believe me, think about the world around you. Every time you jump into an aeroplane, you assume that airplane has been designed to be to work in the situation that it's in, which of course is take off safely, fly through the air safely, and land safely. And dare I say, in the vast majority of cases, that indeed is true. You don't fly by accident, as opposed to qualitative research, which is inductive, what can be interpreted and explained. It's based upon detailed description of phenomenon or phenomena, which is plural. The objective is narrative accounts, allowing understanding of others, and the importance is on reducing complex realities, if at all possible, to simple explanations, although depending upon the explanations offered, that's part of the difficulty. And indeed, what I'm often a bit worried about is the people who then present grand conceptual models based upon these multiple realities. Well, good luck. That's a difficult one if you can pull it off. So bring us back to sort of the, where we started. What is it you're trying to do in terms of research strategy? Well, it's about sort of trying to think about all these issues early on, thinking about the sort of the where you're going to go, and making lots of decisions as early as possible. And also thinking, as I said, about the sort of, in the journey, you don't set off with an empty tank of petrol. You if at all possible, fill the tank up, make sure the tires are okay. Whatever else, bring some drinks if necessary, if you're going to have to stop, work out where you're going to have to stop, if you're going to use toilet breaks, all these sort of things. This is common sense knowledge. Research is not that different. Thinking about sort of what the journey is going to consist of, and how the sort of you may have contingencies built in which allow you to sort of to adopt or adapt if necessary, if you sort of hit roadblocks or delays or impediments to sort of to what you could do. And of course, like anything, if you have a plan of action, and I did mention this earlier on, it's about project management. What do you need to be doing to sort of to achieve what it is that you're going to present in terms of finished theses of whatever it might be, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 words, depending upon the sort of the nature of the doctoral work, in as many years as you need to sort of be able to achieve it. This thing will not come together by accident. Again, you have to think carefully about what you're going to do. I also believe that being willing to adapt and being flexible will serve you well. Remember, of course, the process may take you off in different directions, and don't be sort of phased by that. Don't see that as being something which is going to sort of to cause you problems. Although, of course, what you don't want to do is to sort of have too many impediments at the start, because of course that becomes really draining. But at the same sort of time, recognize that sort of sometimes it doesn't operate, or the research is not going to play out in the way that you thought, and be willing to be guided by what is possible. Again, I've talked about this, and I don't want to get into this one too much, but of course theory is useful, but it doesn't provide all the answers. It just provides particular perspectives depending upon who wrote it. And I remember when I was doing my own piece of work, you read research papers, and they were good, but and often a lot of what I was reading, because of course it was fairly new in certainly British industry, there were lots of books, and of course what I recognized is that they were oversimplistic, and what I call this was, or described it as, practitioner orientated literature. And I guess what it was trying to sell a message, it was trying to sell a book, and they didn't want us to get too much into the sort of the difficulties of this thing. That they were saying that this thing, it'll be highly virtuous in all sort of situations, which it was patently obvious it couldn't be. But of course that's not, that's the nature of the sort of what was produced to the audience that they were trying to sell it to. So you've got to be careful about that. So look at this range of literature. Okay, and what's really important in terms of any strategy is be pragmatic. Remember, opportunities emerge, that I talked about serendipity earlier on. And remember that sometimes when you're in the field, amazing things become possible. And these are opportunities, and it may not be where you thought you were going to go. And of course, let's face it, the most interesting journeys we've ever been on is where you've had to take a bit of a detour. It's happened to me a couple of times recently, where I've come off the motorway, ended up in this beautiful countryside. It takes longer, but you see things which you'd never have envisaged if the journey had been continued down the motorway. And research can sometimes be like that. But of course, detours, that they're time consuming, and of course they do take greater energy. And of course, if you have too many detours, then you get beyond the sort of the original time limit, which causes those sort of problems. But having strategies and indeed having coping strategies is also important. And by that I mean is to sort of having the contingencies, and also being able to talk to your supervisors and your co-researchers, people who are in the same situation, who are probably going through similar problems, maybe at different points in the sort of the journey. And of course, you can use that as a sort of method of developing shared empathy. Okay, and finally, so if you're interested in sort of knowing more about this, that there are advanced training courses for writing up and structuring your thesis, which comes in 3 formats: free study, self-study with peer support, or fully tutored, or they with flexible on-demand feedback whenever you need it. And of course, obviously that depends upon where you are and how you sort of feel that you need to. And obviously what you can do is to sort of click on the sort of the link there, which I won't do because that'll open up a whole new, well, it would open up the sort of link to the sort of the website, which you can do yourself, and it's on sort of the Doctoratehub website. So at this point, I'd like to sort of just invite Jack to come back in. I don't think there are any other questions.
I had mute on. No, there hasn't been. So does anybody have any questions at all?
Okay, well, thank you for
Sounds like you've given out so much information and understanding qualitative, quantitative.
As usual, I've tried to cover a lot of ground very quickly. Again, I thought it would be. I always think I can do it much quicker than I can, but you by the process of elaboration, it takes well, it's trying to sort of reflect upon what does this really mean, and of course the difficulty is that I know what I'm trying to sort of to achieve, but of course when you're at sort of the starting point, which I suspect many people are, it's very difficult to know what's going to sort of work for me. Because of course it's to some extent there's a lot of trial and error, and perhaps maybe just to reflect very quickly, when I was doing my research, I started off on the hypothesis testing route. Now I quickly realized that I was trying to test something, but I couldn't sort of achieve the sort of the notion of causality. I couldn't go into these organizations and say, well, okay, you introduce quality management, are you better off as a result of quality management? Because sometimes
it's subjective.
It's subjective. It could be umpteen things that they could have. I don't. It's a bit like, I don't know. How do you make people feel happy in organisations? Well, talk to them. I'm not going to sort of give you the whole story. Look at the Hawthorne experiment, which is about sort of trying to sort of to use deductive research into sort of people's motivations. And what they found out, it was about lighting levels. It's the sort of the famous Hawthorne sort of experiment, which is always credited to Elton Mayo, but in fact he was just the person who wrote up the report. He wasn't as involved in the actual research as those who carried it out from I think it was Chicago University. And but what it demonstrated is that sort of as they sort of then realized that lighting levels had nothing to do with what they were doing, even though the sort of some of the data suggested, well, there was some data that suggested it was, and then some data which suggested it wasn't. So again, I don't want to delay the people, but and what they then discovered is people sort of felt valued by being talked to by the sort of researchers, because of course hitherto, we're talking back in 1920s America, they were just regarded as people who came in and did things in the factory. They did what they were told, and they were simply motivated by money. It wasn't about the money, it was about sort of the social situation and feeling sort of valued for what they did. Right, somebody must have some comment to make.
Yes, we had, oh, sorry, it's just flicking, bear with me. I'll just go back for a second. So it's just flicked through fairly quickly. Okay, there was a lot of thank you. Greetings from Botswana. Okay. What was the experiment you just mentioned now? That was the Hawthorne experiment.
Yeah, the Hawthorne experiment. And oh gosh. There's a really great book, but I forget Schwartzman. It's a few years since I looked at it. I remember it was a Sage publication. It was a very thin book actually, but it was a really good, because what it talked about was the sort of the way in which it was about using inductive methods, and how Hawthorne demonstrated that sort of by talking to people, you learn more about what goes on than trying to to treat people in a sort of an unthinking way. And of course, the Hawthorne experiment was about sort of trying to adjust the lighting level to see if there was a causality between lighting levels, the amount of light coming into the factory, or the light that the intensity of the lighting and the sort of the output of the workers. And what they discovered was the experiment worked to some extent, and then it didn't work, and this caused befuddlement and confusion until they started talking to people in the factory. Oh, sorry, the actual sort of people who were carrying out the sort of work, which actually, strange enough, it was women working in, they were creating transistors for radios.
All right. Yeah, there's a bit of a write-up in the Sage Research Methods book nowadays too. That was 2012.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I'm just looking. I've just come off. I think it's Schwartzman, Hawthorne. Hawthorne. It's in my PhD, but I haven't looked at my PhD for years. Oh God!
This was Schwartzman and Schwartzman. It's formal objective orientated method.
So just repeat that. So Jack, what's it called?
So formal object orientated method from Schwartzman and Schwartzman.
It could be, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
related to a 1989 experiment.
Yeah, it could be about anthropology and organization. I think it might be. My memory serves me correctly, or if my memory is serving correctly, I think it was anthropology and organization by Schwartzman. But again, the important thing is that, let's not sort of get too worried at this stage. It was about giving a sort of sense that it was the classical sort of attempt to create a scientific experiment by using, and in fact, what they did, just to put a bit more detail, they had sort of the normal workforce whose output levels were measured in whichever way they were measured. The name is Sheikh. Yeah, so somebody's actually come here. Anthropology. I think it is anthropology and organizations. It's 15, 20 years since I last looked at this book. But anyway, so they had the normal workforce, and then what they had was the sort of the control group where they subject them to lighting levels, and then they had the control group where, sorry, the experimental group, let me get this right, and the control group. And so of course the sort of the lighting levels continue as normal for the rest of the workforce. Strange enough, there was an uplift in productivity in the sort of control group where nothing was done to them. And that the head scratching, and in the control group, productivity went up, or output went up as they turned the lighting levels up, which seemed to sort of that was complying or aligning with the sort of the theory that lighting levels did play a role. And then they started reducing the lighting levels, and output continues to go up. And in fact, output only started to drop off when the lighting level reached that of sort of working moonlight. And of course, what this told the sort of the researchers is that there was something going on, but they couldn't work it out. And in effect, just to be absolutely clear, once they started talking to the people engaged in the experiments, that the women who were sort of selected for the group, they felt special, and they wanted to work harder. So what came out of this, most importantly, was firstly it undermined the sort of the notion that you can apply scientific methods to people. Because of course they have brains and they can work out what's going on, but also it was the beginning of what's called sort of because of course up to that point the view was scientific management could be scientific principles that have been used to sort of create the fuel that allowed factories to sort of to operate. You could use scientific method to people, and it was the beginning of the sort of so-called human relations movement in management, whereby you had to much better understand the sort of the particular positions and of the individuals. Hopefully that's a good summary. I normally use that one. I've got some flip charts to show the sort of output levels, and we do a bit of sort of questions and answers. But as I say, what it tells us, if you're going to, it brings us back to sort of what is the sort of the nature of what you want to understand. What is its ontology? What does it consist of? And again, to re-emphasize, if it's got physical reality, because it's a piece of something or other, steel or timber or glass or chemicals or whatever, then that's the nature of what it is, and it will perform in whatever way you think it will do. And we're creating lots of new compounds with our sort of advanced knowledge, including sort of likes of graphene. So the next generation will probably sort of use graphene in a way that you know, we don't envisage, but that's the nature of sort of scientific endeavor, as opposed to, you know, if you're going to go into organization and better understand how people operate and interact with one another, then it's a different ball game. Recognizing the sort of the ontology of whatever you're sort of studying will then determine the appropriateness of the methods you use to sort of to study. And as I say, you know, if you were doing the Hawthorne experiment with animals, for instance, you know, they might operate differently in different light levels. You know, I don't know whether anybody's ever tried this, but of course the one thing that you can't do is get animals, no matter how intelligent that those animals are, to sort of offer sort of explanations. Oh, right, okay. I was waiting for
It's
some
Schwartzman and Schwartzman. Sorry, gone very quiet.
So somebody must have something to say. I wish somebody would say something.
I think
Actually, what's always most interesting, if you get somebody who says, "Well, you've just talked a whole lot of rubbish,"
then they're the ones you want to hear.
yeah, I mean, right, okay. Well, I mean, I'm tempted to say, well, we've got another session at 3:30. So if nobody is willing to sort of ask any questions or make any comments, I think it's probably best for me to sort of to wrap this one up, take 10 minutes, and then we reconvene. It's a different link, isn't it, Jack?
No, it's actually the same link.
Oh, so we can continue this same link.
Yes, they can stay on if they wish. Yes.
Okay. Well, what I was going to suggest is that sort of, how about if I will, if you believe this is appropriate, Jack, I will draw a conclusion, or bring this presentation to a conclusion. And
Yep.
what I will do is I will sort of hide myself and mute myself for the next 10 minutes, and I'll reconvene at 3:30.
Yep.
And we can then go into sort of, well, I mean, it can effectively be a continuation of this presentation.
Yep. I'll just stop recording on this one.